Imagine this. You're working on a construction project and accidentally damage a client's property. Without insurance, you could be held responsible for the repair costs. And what about the unforeseen accidents that can happen on a job site? Construction projects come with their fair share of risks. If a third party gets injured, you could be facing medical expenses, legal fees, or even potential settlements. But with construction liability insurance, those expenses are covered, saving you from a significant financial burden. So, if you're a general contractor, renovation expert, or construction professional, don't leave your business vulnerable. Nail down the low-cost construction liability insurance you need and get a certificate of insurance quickly. And get a free quote now by visiting zensurance.com/save35. Zensurance is Canada's leading source for small business and construction liability insurance. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Construction Record Podcast. I'm digital media editor Warren Frey, and with me today I have
Lindsey Cole, DCN and JOC editor.
As usual on Wednesday, we're doing our news roundup. Let's start with the East. Go for it, Lindsey.
Sure. So on the east side of things, we have a couple of interesting stories on the go this week. One of them that was Don Wall worked on is a topic that I think crosses the country. So it's certainly not just an eastern-centric topic, but it generates from Ottawa. So and recently, the local 71 business manager out of the Ottawa area, his name was Ronald Maisonneuve, passed away recently from mesothelioma, which we all know is an asbestos related illness. What is striking about that is a lot of the people that attended his memorial or knew of him also don't really understand where he potentially could have got that much exposure, but it reiterates the message that just a little bit of exposure can have deadly consequences. So as a result of it, it's led some of the representatives from this union as well as the larger spectrum of stakeholders to renew a call for safety in the workplace and for potentially some more regulation or monitoring when it comes to asbestos exposure, so that you can at least try to decrease the number of asbestos related diseases that are out there and could generate like 20 years after exposure, right? So it's certainly kind of puts a face. I know there's a lot of people that have been impacted by mesothelioma and asbestos related illnesses. So this just kind of hits home the message again. So it was a good piece done by Don and kind of gives a renewed call to action, if you will. Another one is just kind of a story that we have that we've been following as it carries on is the renovation details for the Rogers Centre here in Toronto, formerly known as the Sky Dome, which is what I when we were doing our Building Canada 150 series, I had the privilege of interviewing some of the people who were originally responsible for some of the construction of the Sky Dome. So I always like to take a look at, it was pretty cool. Especially back then because the retractable roof was this big feature, and we've covered the renovations as they've been going on. There's been upgrades done to the roof, and then now the massive renovation is being undertaken. PCL is a large part of the success story here when it comes to the renovation in general. So the new details that were released are pertaining to the 100-level seating level. So, or the seating bowl, I should call it. And it's considered the next phase, slated to be complete for the 2024 season. So when the Jays wrap up playing, they get in there. They are hoping to have the current bowl demolished by the end of 2023 and then rebuilt. So it's going to have some pretty cool features when it's all said and done, and we'll follow it as it goes through for sure. I'm sure they'll hit a home run.
Do you do what I do, which is call things by what they were called 30 years ago because you refuse to call it whatever the new thing is?
Yes. 100%.
Also, it changes all the time. So crypto.com arena, I'm looking at you.
It will always be the Sky Dome, as far as I'm concerned. Kind of another cross-section story that spans into BC, Alberta, and Quebec. Don wrote a story from Defence Construction Canada. They had their annual general meeting recently, and they highlighted a bunch of projects that are currently underway, as well as maybe some that maybe are upcoming. One of those is the AB Jetty Recapitalization Project at CFB Esquimalt in BC. Sorry if I said that wrong, Warren.
Oh,
You would know.
Esquimalt. So close.
Esquimalt. I was close, so close. And then there are also going to be some new hangars constructed in Cold Lake, Alberta, and Bagotville, Quebec. So we kind of touch on those, but what I think is interesting is it also the annual general meeting, a number of the CFO and a couple of other stakeholders or executives, I should say, with DCC highlighted that, there were 1,400 contracts valued at $668 million. So that says to me, obviously, that they're in charge of a lot of interesting projects that help make Canada safer. So check that out from Don, because it's pretty cool. On the western side of things, we are following once again. I know this is going to come as a shock to all.
Oh yeah, yep.
But the BC port strike actions
are never ending, but possibly ending.
But possibly ending. Not sure where it's going. Mystery of the BC port labor strife continues. According to the latest sources, and who knows, maybe by this time this podcast comes out, it could change. But I'm going to go with the latest info that I know, which is essentially they've reached a tentative deal. Details of that deal are not being released to the media or anyone else, I think, for that matter. But I think what's interesting is the Canadian Industrial Relations Board has basically said to the union that represents the 7,400 port workers that they better not change their mind about this deal during ratification. It would be considered, quote unquote, a unfair labor practice. So they've been kind of told in one way or another that they should definitely vote for the deal and end this labor action that is and labor disagreement that's been carrying on at the ports. So we'll see what ends up happening. But I believe they have to vote on the deal by Friday.
Okay. Well,
so yeah,
we'll see. Is the operative two words there? Yeah.
Exactly. And then the other and final story from the west side that I'll highlight that I think is really quite pertinent is we have a story on a construction-related angle of sorts to the wildfire season that is plaguing Canada in general, but obviously out west, some lives have been lost, very sadly, out there. But this was an example was used in the story about what's called a fire guard that was created in Grande Prairie, Alberta. Now, Grande Prairie, as we know, in late May, Alberta in general, really, was hit hard with wildfires. But obviously, the season continues on, and BC's been impacted. And then here in Ontario and Quebec, we've also had impacts too. But basically, these fire guards are almost like, for lack of a better term, mini roadways that are created that create a break hopefully in the fire. They try to, sometimes they're 100 meters across. They can be 200 meters wide in some cases. It's just basically how they're trying to create these almost mini blocking roads that can prevent a fire. So it's an interesting piece on how engineering can play a role and construction can play a role in hoping to quell what's been a very chaotic wildfire season. So yeah, I would check that out. And that's basically it from our DCN and JOC newsroom.
Okay, great. Up next, we've got an interview with Robert Bronk, the CEO of the Ontario Construction Secretariat, all about apprenticeships. Let's start with what the Ontario Construction Secretariat does and how it addresses needs in the construction industry in Ontario specifically.
Well, we were created by the government actually 30 years ago. It's our 30th anniversary this year. And initially, it was to support bargaining and collective negotiations with the ICI sector. There's 7 different sectors in Ontario. I don't want to get too complicated here, but there's 7 sectors. We're the ICI, which is institutional, commercial, and industrial. So that's schools, hospitals, commercial buildings, and then warehouses and some mining. And so we're the unionized sector. We're funded by the industry. And initially, we were created to gather financial information that would help facilitate the bargaining process, as well as creating collective agreement libraries and those kinds of things. We've kind of, as the industry has evolved over the last 30 years, we've actually been very, very connected to workforce development. For a number of years, we had an initiative that was targeting high school students. It was called Build Your Future. And we moved that across the province, and very successful to the point where the Ministry of Labor said, hey, we want to do that, and we want to do it 4 or 5 places throughout the province every year. So we've taken up a bit of an advisory role in that. We've also have supported the building trades initiatives, where they've created a website, which I can maybe talk about later, but it's called Construction Training and Apprenticeship Ontario, ctaontario.ca. So we've been very supportive in terms of our industry partners. So we have unions and management. So contractors are part of our network. And so we've been trying to support them in their initiatives to recruit people looking for a professional career in construction.
And well, you mentioned 3 years. Obviously, the biggest event for all of us for 3 years and counting really is the pandemic. So, and that really shook up every industry, but construction specifically. Although construction was one of the first people back for various reasons, you know, the nature of the job for one, at least on the field. So, how did you find you had to sort of reorient yourselves to sort of adapt to the pandemic and adapt people to work during then?
Well, there was a lot of interesting things that came out of the pandemic, especially safety on the job site. Actually, I did an analysis using WSIB numbers. It was actually, you were less likely to get COVID on the job site than you were in the general population. That the infection rate was up to 40 times less. So, and I think part and parcel of that is the protective equipment that people already use. So, for example, many trades are wearing a mask already. You know, when you're a drywaller and you're sanding, you're wearing the PPE already. You're wearing eye protection. You're wearing hand protection. You're generally not on top of each other on the work site. You know, you're working in teams, but you are almost social distancing by accident. So the construction trade really responded well. They did have some things to do with sanitation and hygiene, which has continued. That's been a positive thing that's come out of the pandemic. Was, you know, some sites were terrible, frankly, and especially for women. And so out of the pandemic came, you know, an improvement with respect to that. Also, training and teaching had to continue. And so there was a lot of ingenious methods and ways to deliver that training. And actually they have carried on. So there was a number of hybrid where there was some of the apprentices were in the classroom and some were working from home or viewing from home. And I actually attended a few, I went to a few training centers and saw how they used these actually big cameras. So they were working on electrical circuits, and the cameras focused on the circuits. And so actually it was on the whole screen. So the apprentices in the classroom could see it projected on a big screen, and those apprentices who were at home could see it. And it actually was clearer than if they were all standing in the classroom and staring over the table. So there was a lot of initiatives. The training centers became very creative in how they delivered training. And I know some of that stuff spilled over. So they're able to deliver training to remote areas. You know, for example, there's no training centers in Thunder Bay, but those apprentices in Thunder Bay were able to participate in a meaningful way and not have to travel. So there was a number of initiatives that came out of the pandemic that are continuing and that are actually improvements that might not have happened if there wasn't a pandemic, if that's, you know, the little bit of a silver lining in that regard.
Now, I guess our current crisis, because we're always in one crisis or another, is affordable housing and affordability generally. So apprenticeship is part of that, getting people who can build more homes, build more facilities, more infrastructure. That's all part of it. So where do you fall into that? Because I would assume your expertise has been asked for in this regard.
Yeah, I think in that regard, it's the perception. It's creating tools online and in person to sort of get rid of that stigma. There's a stigma associated with construction. People tend to view, they extrapolate what they see. So they see people on the roads, they see people down, putting in sewers and water mains, and guys in the foundation. But there's like 25 different trades, and I think most people know, plumbers, painters, carpenters, etc. They know what they do, but a lot of people don't know what millwrights do, or boilermakers, or teamsters. And so there's a lot of not misinformation, but a lack of information, where people are making decisions not based on the big picture, that these are professional careers with benefits and pensions, and there's a whole subject matter expertise associated with each trade. So I think a lot of people are not looking at construction because they've got preconceived notions. And so part of what we need to do to get people in is to dispel those myths and to give a better picture of what a profession in the trades looks like. And so that is a big initiative. And the Ministry of Labor, Monty McNaughton, has been really good with that. There's a lot of things that people aren't aware. For example, people who work in construction have one of the highest job satisfaction ratings of all the different industries. That people go home, and at the end of the day, they see what they've done. And I'll give you an example. My grandfather, I'm from Winnipeg originally, and the Richardson Building is an iconic building, and it's like the CN Tower of Winnipeg. And my grandfather worked on that, 40 below in Winnipeg. And every time we drive by the Richardson, I worked on that building, and yeah, Grandpa, we know. But the job satisfaction of, I worked on that building, I worked on that project, or I helped build that subdivision. There's a lot of job satisfaction in that. And I think new Canadians and, people, Canadians that have been, generations, we got to go to university, we got to go, you got to be an accountant, you got to be a lawyer, etc. Well, there's a lot of trades that I think people are not aware of, that are high tech, that your marks have to be just as good to get into. So to be an electrician, you have to have grade 12 physics. Your marks have to be as good as to get into U of T. It's so the perception out there is that, oh, you're not good enough to get into college or university. Oh, you should go into the trades. Well, that day is long past. That day is long past. And so I think there's career paths that people aren't aware of. And I think our job is to change that perspective and have people have an intelligent look what the options are, what each trade does. Like I like to compare the trades to doctors. So you have like an orthopedic surgeon does your knee, you have a cardiologist does your heart, oncologist deals with cancer. You would not want an oncologist working on your knee. You wouldn't want. So yes, they're all doctors, but they have their environment is sometimes totally different. And that's like the trades. So many of the trades are inside, high tech. You don't see them. Once the curtain wall's up in the building, you don't see all the people going inside and working on smart buildings and greening it. And, that's a big thing with the youth today, is the environment and the greening of the industry, and construction is leading the way in that regard. So there's a lot of boxes that if you investigate, you can tick and say, high tech, greening the environment, also the career path ability, where, after you finish your apprenticeship and you write your exam, you get your certificate of qualification, become a journey person. You can take supervisor and foreman courses. Then you can also go to Fanshawe, George Brown, or Algonquin. They will recognize your certificate of qualification for 2 years off a degree. So you only have to go 2 years, and you can get your a degree in business management, specializing in construction. So by the time you're 30 years old, you could have like 7 years experience and a university degree. Like the world is, this is incredible. Like, if I wish I had that option when I was younger, because you can start your own business. And that is so important to a lot of people, is, the ability to start your own business. And that option is there. And, it's so a lot of these things are in the mix. And it's not it can't be captured in a tweet.
Mhm.
You know, it's so it's hard to get people to sit down and stop and think about this. So
Mhm.
like parents, guidance counselors, the influencers, it's sometimes it's a bit of a, you know, you have to sit down and listen to understand, and then you also have to do due diligence to see what the different trades are. What trade would match my personality, my strengths, my, you know, what I like to do. So there's things like that, you know, just like I'm going to go to university. Well, what course are you going to take? Wow, there's like what, 50 different choices. You know,
Mhm.
you have to do that as well. Like, am I going to take geography? Or going to take physics? Am I going to be an engineer? Or going to be a nurse? You know, there's all those decision processes as well. The same thing with construction. And I think getting the message out and having people sit down and listen is going to be a big part of addressing this need with housing and all the other infrastructure projects that
Mhm.
have been announced, like, you know, all these new subways and hospitals. You know, the Ottawa Civic Hospital, they're contemplating one in Windsor. And, you know, it's, if you want a career path and stability, these things, there's stuff on the books for the next 10 or 15 years. So if you're worried about
Mhm.
layoffs or those kinds of things, there's so much work in the pipeline.
Now, given all that, like I've reported on construction for about a little more than a decade, and this has been a sentiment since I started. So have you seen progress in the
Yes,
last 10 years or so? And maybe you could tell me some of the, because you do research, OCS does research, and
yes,
so you would
yes.
be ideally suited to tell me.
Yeah, we do see progress, and it started before the pandemic. Again, I'm going to talk about, you know, Minister McNaughton. He has been a great ambassador. He's talking to so many people. They're putting money where their mouth is. They're not just saying, "Hey, you know, kids, look at these jobs." They're actually putting money into this. They're assisting training centers with funding so they can increase their training capacity, and the federal government as well with their UTIP grants. So
Mhm.
both levels of government have been really pushing this. Um, if you want to talk about major construction, purchaser of major construction is the City of Toronto. They've also have created social procurement policies where they're trying to recruit people from neighborhoods that have been traditionally underrepresented and
Mhm.
put the message out to those groups as well. So we're seeing progress in that regard, because you let's face it, it's not just construction that's facing these shortages. There's manufacturing, the
Mhm.
service industries. Like when you look at it, you know, you sometimes you're in a silo and you don't see what's going on in other industries. And it's not just construction that's looking for good people. It's these other industries as well. So in the sense, we are competing because, you know, there are some overlap in terms of positions.
Mhm.
And so we need to be doing that better, and we are, but I think it needs to scale up. I think, you know, that's the big thing right now is we've got some good initiatives going. Ministry of Labor has that, it's like a trades fair. It's not just construction, but they're moving it around, you know, they're Hamilton, Thunder Bay, Ottawa. So they're doing that initiative. I think that's a great way because kids can come in and talk to somebody. They can do a hands-on project. They can see what tools that person's using, what that trade is using. And I think that's a great initiative. And that's starting to reap results. And I think we're working with OYAP. I'm not sure if you know the Ontario Youth Apprenticeship Program, and
Mhm.
trying to scale up with them and to better educate those counselors with respect to what a trade needs. And yeah, we're making progress. I can't quantify that at this point in time, but I do anecdotally know that we are making progress, but there's still a lot of work to be done.
Okay. And you mentioned a website, so maybe you could go into more detail about that.
Yes. So the Construction Training and Apprenticeship Ontario website, so it's ctaontario.ca, just the one dot between Ontario and CA.
Mhm.
It has a sort of a snapshot of all the different trades. So it'll tell you what a Boilermaker does. It'll tell you what their pay range is. It'll tell you where the training centers are. It gives you more information to ask so you can investigate that and maybe have more questions. But it talks about each of the trades. Eventually, we're going to get a video up on each one of them and have an interview with an apprentice. And so it's going to give a better perspective of, you know, what that trade is, what the prerequisites are, what the career path could possibly be. Skilled Trades Ontario also has a very good website, and it's skilledtradesontario.ca. It's all one word. They've got a snapshot of all the trades, and they give a similar view in terms of what the prerequisites are, where the training is, those kinds of things. So those are two chief websites, but the CTA Ontario is still getting there, and we're hoping to make it better.
Okay, and finally, you have a conference coming up in October, which is not as far away as it seems. So maybe you could tell us what's happening at this conference.
Well, we're still planning who our keynote speakers are going to be, but generally speaking, we bring in all our stakeholders. So we get the union and management side to come in, and we try to enhance their relationship in terms of improving labor relations. That's one of our goals, or one of the reasons why we were set up. And we're investigating a couple of different topics that would be relevant. We just had a labor relations forum at Niagara-on-the-Lake in June. And we had someone come in and talk about AI, and boy, oh boy, that's really it's coming. It's it's like when the internet was there. Oh no, it's just a fad. It's going to go. No, the internet's not going away. Well, AI is not going away, and the fear with people's initial fear is, oh, it's going to take away jobs. Well, it's not going to take away people's jobs. It's going to change how you do things. You're going to be able to do things smarter and with better tools. And I think, it's going to have an impact on training, how we can train apprentices. It's going to have an impact on contractors, on how they bid on jobs. They're going to be able to do that more accurately. So, it is a bit scary when you look at like Terminator and, computers becoming self-aware. And, there are some thought leaders who are saying this could be a possibility. But that's one of the possible themes we're looking at right now. We haven't nailed it down yet, but we're still looking at it. But things like that, we try to bring relevant speakers to our conference to, provoke some thoughts and some thinking, and try some new initiatives, new innovations, and try to incorporate that to be competitive, to increase worker safety, and to increase profitability with the contractors. At the end of the day, they got to make money, or else they're going to be out of business, and then you lose jobs. So it's got to be a win-win-win scenario.
Okay, well, thanks for talking to us today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Before you go, here's a few economic stories we've published recently. Dmitry Konovalov has his new global market scan, all about how global spending on energy transition technologies in 2022 amounted to approximately $1.1 trillion, a new annual high. This record-breaking amount represented a 31% increase relative to the previous year. Construct Connect senior economist Alex Carrick's new article is all about housing starts versus economic orthodoxy. And as he puts it, Canadian home builders understand there's a long game to be played that would be driven by population growth. Our senior economist, Michael Gooks, has Construct Connect's Project Stress Index for July 3rd, 2023, and we also have Construct Connect's top 10 largest construction project starts in Canada and a trend graph for June 2023. That's all available online on the DCN and JOC. And if you'd like to hear other episodes of the Construction Record Podcast, we're available on Apple Music, Spotify, and Amazon Music, as well as the Journal of Commerce and Daily Commercial News. Thanks for listening.